Hi, my name's Caroline. I'm an integrative humanistic counsellor affiliated with the BACP. I have just finished recording a really heavy video looking at the difference between an unhealthy relationship and an abusive relationship. I wanted to preempt this series of videos with that video in order to support anyone who is in that very confused state of, is it me, is it them, is it the relationship, what's going on here? Because it can feel very confusing if we are in an extremely toxic and or abusive relationship. It can be really hard to understand sort of what's going on, and in that first video, the first piece of advice I gave, I'm just going to reiterate it in this one, is to get yourself a copy of this book. I do not get any kind of money from recommending this book. I do not know these authors, but it's just a brilliant little resource that I've used and I've recommended to a lot of my clients and my friends. It's called the Dialectical Behaviour Therapy Diary, Monitoring Your Emotional Regulation Day by Day. It's very simple, straightforward, little tick box, daily tick box exercise to help you monitor your emotions, and it gives really helpful hints on how to regulate them and on how to improve your emotional stability. And I'm going to recommend that throughout this whole series of videos I'm going to do around leaving a toxic or abusive relationship. Because the primary thing that you can do, other than some very practical steps, the primary thing you can do is work on yourself. And in this first video, I'm going to talk about one of the blocks to leaving a toxic relationship, and it's a biggie. It's, if I had to boil down the reason why, let's say 90% of people come into therapy, I would boil it down to fear of judgment, fear of other people's judgment on you, which ultimately boils down to fear of rejection by other people, which ultimately boils down to fear of abandonment by other people. So what do I mean by this? So looking at our pasts when we lived in tribes, in the caves or on the savannas, we all heavily relied on each other to support each other, to feed ourselves, to look after our families, to stay healthy, to protect from predators. Now we all think we're like super advanced, don't we, in our houses and, you know, living in our cities or with our smartphones, but actually our brains are still very much wired up for tribal living. And so one of the huge blocks to us is our fear of being judged by other people if we end a relationship. Even if logically we know that this relationship is toxic, this relationship is abusive, I'm not happy, I know that the best thing for me is to leave, we can still have a strong emotional drive to stay because of fear of being judged by other people. It won't just be about other people's judgment, but as I said earlier, I'm going to do a series of videos about other things that can block us as well. But what is this fear of judgment? So this fear of judgment ultimately boils down to a fear of a very primeval fear, survival instinct that we have. Because if we are judged by the tribe to be not a good person, then we will potentially be rejected by that tribe. And if we are rejected by that tribe, then we would have, back in the caves or in the savannas, we would have been abandoned by that tribe. And if we were abandoned by the tribe, there is a very high likelihood that we would not have survived. We wouldn't have survived physically, we wouldn't have survived emotionally or mentally, because there's a reason why it's a form of torture to isolate a person. So there's a very, very strong survival instinct that's hardwired into us to stay with a partner, even if logically we know that partner's not good for us. So that's something that can be incredibly difficult to overcome. So, but it can be quite helpful to identify that and to be able to understand what it is that is keeping us locked into something that is not serving us. It's not serving us. It's not in our best interest. So this fear of other people's judgment of us. So this not only would have come down through sort of genetically, through the ancestrally, in terms of how our ancestors survived, but it will also have been reinforced through our childhood, and this is very much fed into through attachment theory, whereby when we were younger we would have received messages from our primary caregivers, usually our mum, but not always. More and more single dads, more and more grandparents, can also be older or younger brothers and sisters. We were also influenced by messages from school friendships, teachers, authority figures, aunts and uncles, cousins, the wider community, the bullies at school, not bullies at school, friendships at school, and into young adulthood, early relationships, and even later relationships can really, really alter the way we understand relationships and the way we respond within romantic relationships. And this is, I'm primarily talking, I'm going to give examples of romantic relationships, but we can also use this to conceptualize friendships and familial relationships, because mostly the concepts apply across pretty much all relationships, all types of relationships. But I'm going to use the example of romantic relationships because that's generally where this shows up. So as we were growing up, we would have received verbal and non-verbal messages from our caregivers around what type of behaviour will result in us getting our parents' attention. I'm going to say parents just for simplicity. If you weren't raised by your parents, I'm sorry, I'm not trying to exclude you or sideline you, just for ease of this video. So please insert caregiver or whoever, and yeah, apologies to those who were in institutions and who didn't receive direct care from a person, and instead were it was the organisation, and it may have been that may have looked like several different caregivers, but for reason I'm just going to use the word parents. So when we as we were raised by our parents, they will have, and they would not, most likely they would not have been fully conscious of these messages that they were giving us, but the messages might have looked something like this. You know, in order for you to be in order for me to approve of you, you need to stop crying, you need to be a good girl, you need to get a move on, you need to achieve really high results, you need to be a bit helpless so then I can step in and feel really important by helping you. You need to make sure other people's needs come first. So what do I mean by that? That can show up in lots of different ways. So for example, you know, stereotypically, parents might raise boys to believe that it's not okay for them to cry. They may stereotypically raise girls to be super kind and thoughtful towards other people's needs and put other people's needs above their own. Now, gender is irrelevant actually, but we, you know, some of these stereotypes do exist for a reason. Now, I've done some videos about these messages that you may have received as a child, but I'll just run through it briefly now. So there's 5 main behaviours, and most likely you'll identify with at least 2. You may identify with 4. You probably, it's not likely you identify with all 5. So the first one to look at is it's called a driver in transactional analysis terms. Be strong. So, you know, don't show weakness, don't be needy, you know, don't ever go to the doctors, be, you know, have broad shoulders, like take it all on yourself. Don't ever ask for help, always rely on yourself. These are the messages that can come through to us either overtly or through body language, and we might then grow up with this feeling that I don't want anyone to feel like I'm weak or needy. I don't want anyone to see me as anything other than being strong, capable, smart, powerful. Okay? And so, if we're in a relationship, we might stay in that relationship if we believe that by leaving that relationship, other people are going to judge us as not being strong. Okay, so if we fear the tribe, when I say tribe, that's friends, family, social, God help us, social media, audiences, the community, my work colleagues, you know, anyone who's sort of out there, the person I'm leaving, my children, my relatives, if you live in extended communities, there may be a lot of judgment. You may fear judgment from the extended community. My church, if you're involved in an organised religion, you may fear their judgment of you. And so if one of your what we call drivers is I must be strong, it's highly likely that you will find it very difficult to leave your toxic relationship, because you might worry that everyone else will believe you're not capable. You're not capable. You couldn't keep your marriage together. You couldn't keep your relationship together. You may feel like you don't want your kids to see you being in a weak or vulnerable or needy position of not of having a failed marriage, let's say, or of, you know, having to be a single parent. It may be that you fear the judgment of others of, you know, I'm a single parent now. What does that look like? I'm a divorcee. I failed at marriage. Society will judge me for not being, you know, a good enough partner, for not being a good enough mother, for not being understanding enough. So, and so the Be Strong driver is very is particularly comes into its own, sadly, when it comes to relationship breakdowns. And if you were given that message, we're not blaming your parents, but we are acknowledging that, you know, maybe they came from a background where they were given that message, so they're just passing it on. You know, our parents probably, hopefully our parents were doing the best they can, and weren't intentionally giving you that message. Hopefully it was subconscious, although some parents sadly do give intentional messages like that. So yeah, have a little think. Is that one of your drivers? If so, I will try to remember to link, I think up there, the video about don't be weak or needy. Be perfect. So again, I did a video about something about you know, you're not a robot. So again, this really feeds into this idea of I can't leave my relationship because then society, then the tribe will judge me. And I mean, all of these drivers, it's not just about everyone else's judgment, it's about your judgment of yourself. I would judge myself as not being perfect. I've failed at being a wife, mother, partner, you know, lover, however you see yourself. So be perfect can show up as you know, you may have had the message when you were younger that you always had to get things right, or you may have really felt this drive or got to get things right. You may be an overachiever, academically or financially or in your career, or you may be super critical of your physical appearance. You may be very much driven to spend a lot of money on how you look, on the clothes you wear, on the house you live in, on the car you drive. Or it may show up in terms of putting a lot of energy into social media, into appearing to have the perfect life. It may show up in lots of different ways. It may show up as I've got to, you know, always cook the perfect meal for my family, or keep my house in, you know, immaculate, or I've always got to show the world that I have this perfect car, that I never make mistakes, that you know, you may not be able to sort of leave the house unless you are, you know, immaculately groomed. So as I said, this comes from childhood. This may have been, you know, your parents may have given you the message that You are not okay as you are. You are only okay if you achieve well at school. If you are, there are lots of kind of extracurricular activities that parents can become super invested in their children. You know, possibly some of the more public hobbies such as performing, competitive sports as well. Those are particular areas where it can show up. It can show up around if your parents have insisted that you take a lot more responsibility around housework, for example, or jobs around the house. If there was very disciplinarian, if there were penalties, consequences for not achieving, if you set lists of jobs around the house or academic achievements that were required of you, and if you were given the impression overtly, covertly, that may be through physical punishment, it may be through emotional punishment, mental, or just a sense that if I will, it can be things like I will be ignored, because to a child being ignored feels like death. You, as a child, you need to have your parents' attention in order to survive. And so the idea of I've got to be strong or I've got to be perfect links into survival. Your parents have to notice you in order to feed you and love you and give you clothes and warmth and protection. And so from a really young age, we learn that in order to get our parents' attention and in order to avoid negative consequences, we need to behave in a certain way. And then what happens over time, even after we moved out of our family home, we have introjected our parents into our brains, into our minds. And so your parent may not be giving you those messages, but your own brain is now giving you those messages. So it's come from your upbringing. It's reinforced through evolutionary psychology, through the tribe and fear of rejection from the tribe. So you fear rejection from the tribe, you fear rejection from your parents, and usually when we get in a romantic relationship, there will be, particularly if it's an abusive one, there will be something about your partner that will be related to how you engaged with your parents, for good or for bad, or often we are playing out dynamics. I'm not going to get Freudian and say if you're a woman you try and marry your dad and all the rest of it. It's not that simple, I don't think. Hopefully not. But there is usually some unfinished business there, and that's often why we can end up in abusive relationships. People who may not look like a parent figure, but whose behaviour may echo behaviours that you experienced when you were growing up. I'm not going to get sidetracked down that rabbit hole. So another behaviour is the driver to hurry up. So in a romantic relationship, this might show up. So if you're the kind of person who feels like the clock's always ticking, and you're on like this countdown of oh my god, if I don't get all this shit done, then I'm going to run out of time. Again, I've done a video, I can't remember what it's called, something to do with time running out maybe, or hurry up. Anyway, I'll try and link it. And how this can emerge in romantic relationships, particularly toxic relationships, might be, for example, if you feel as though you're running out of time to have a baby, if you have that that countdown running, whereby you may get to a time in your life where you feel as though your fertility window is closing down, and you may feel compelled to choose a partner who maybe isn't emotionally safe, but who, you know, we can look at evolutionary psychology around how we make choices, subconsciously make choices around who to pair bond with in order to procreate. So we may choose someone who may have the physical attributes that we're looking for. Again, all subconscious probably, but they may not have the emotional awareness that we would like within a relationship. So that's how the hurry up driver might show up in a toxic relationship. You may then have your children and then start to think, oh, hang on a minute, male or female, whatever gender, and you may then start to think, oh, actually, and it also works for same-sex relationships, because, you know, we can all feel like, you know, we want to have children before we get too old, although not everyone does. So we may then have our children and then start to realise, actually, you know, I kind of rushed into that, or maybe I didn't see the red flags, but now my kids have come along, I'm starting to see that actually this person is not okay to be in a relationship with. Other areas it might show up is if either you or your partner is very much driven by this hurry up imperative. That can be hard to tolerate within a relationship if you don't have that as your driver. So if one of you is the type of person who is constantly on red alert to like run around and achieve this, do that, got to get this done, got to get that done, time's running out, oh my goodness, I'm in such a rush, that behavior, I mean, hard being the person who is constantly on the go trying to achieve all this stuff. Also hard for the person living in that relationship, because what can happen is the person who is in the hurry up can project stuff onto the other person around, why aren't you matching me? Why aren't you as enthusiastic as I am to decorate the house top to bottom within a week? You know, and this can then lead to sort of real misunderstanding, miscommunication, and hard for the person who has this drive to get everything done and who doesn't understand their partner, who just doesn't feel that motivation or that urge to tick everything off their list. They may be perhaps more laid back, or that they may have other drivers that feel more important to them to display in their lives. Please others, or people pleasing, as it's commonly called, is all about when you grew up. It would have been the message would have been your parents' needs are more important than your own, or your siblings' needs are more important than your own, or your church's needs, your communities, the needs of the family, everyone else's needs are more important than yours. And in a relationship, this can show up as you constantly putting the other person's needs first. In addictive dynamics, addictive relationships, they would use the term enabler, possibly. Sometimes the word empath is used, so you're highly tuned into what everyone else needs, and you would spend your life, or the vast majority of your life, meeting everyone else's needs, completely abandoning your own. What usually will happen in that scenario is that eventually you'll hit a crisis point where you are, I mean, I'm stereotyping here, doesn't always happen, but in like stereotypical situations, you might then eventually just break and say, I can't do this anymore. I've spent my life doing everything for everyone else. It's now time for me to look at my own needs. And the work there for you, as with all of the other drivers, is to try and understand, you know, why is that important for you to meet everyone else's needs rather than your own. So that would show up in why can't you, why do you find it hard leaving toxic relationships? So very obvious, this one, because the judgment of your partner, your kids, your family, friends, society, that is really ingrained into you as someone who displays a please others driver. It would feel incredibly emotionally difficult to sit in the energy of feeling the negative judgment of others, fearing their rejection, fearing their judgment, fearing that means you're not a good person because you haven't put your partner's needs first. And so that will very much keep you in toxic relationships way longer than is necessary. The pattern generally will be you'll stay in it far too long, and then maybe something often very, very small will be the catalyst for you to just suddenly go, I can't do this anymore. Try hard, slightly different type of drive, whereby there is a certain type of learnt helplessness. So you would have learned as a child that the best way to get your parents' attention is by being unable to do something, and just not ever quite completing a task, so that your parent would swoop in and help you, and that would be how you would get the attention that you need or that you crave. I mean, we're all a bit, you know, most people are guilty of starting projects and never finishing them at some point. But when this pattern becomes a form of self-sabotage, so, you know, you don't ever pass your driving test despite, you know, having learned how to drive and, you know, being intellectually capable of passing the theory. There's just always a reason why you don't quite, you know, cross the finishing line, and that's because there's this learned sort of self-sabotage that's been subtly conveyed to you throughout childhood. So what can we do about these drivers? How can we counteract them in order to be able to break free of our toxic relationships? So the first step is obviously awareness, really sitting down. Think about those 5. What are the main, what's your main one? What's your second one? There may be, like, as I say, up to 4. It's probably wouldn't identify with all 5, but you might, who knows? There's most likely to be two really key ones that will be blocking you from leaving your relationship. And how do we break through? So the opposite of a driver is an allower. So just starting to practice that in small parts of your life. So, you know, if you have the be strong, you know, breaking that down into what can I do to allow myself to be a little more vulnerable. Not if you're in an abusive relationship, do not become vulnerable to your abuser. But what can you do to reach out for help if you're the type of person that doesn't ever ask for help? Taking really small baby steps, maybe meeting a friend for coffee and starting to have that conversation, opening up, being able to sort of say, you know, have you got any thoughts? Have you got any ideas? I'm struggling right now. And I know, I get it, how hard it can be to break that mold, you know, but you need to break that mold. If you're in an abusive relationship, you need to start breaking these patterns. You know, if you're the type of person that won't ever book a doctor's appointment, you know, take that step, ask someone to help you make the doctor's appointment, go and see the doctor. These are ways in which you can start. Once you start to take baby steps, you're positively reinforcing, you're telling your nervous system, you're telling your subconscious that you are okay. It is safe for you to have needs. You are allowed to have needs. You are a human being, you're not a robot. So this takes time. This is not an overnight solution. I don't think I ever offer overnight solutions. But use some of the nervous system techniques, the butterfly hug and the physiological sigh. I've also put videos up about that, to push through some of the discomfort of going out of your comfort zone, sitting in that really visceral physiological discomfort of admitting that, you know, you need a bit of help here, whilst keeping yourself safe and protected at all times. I've said in my first video, if you're in an abusive relationship, please, 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 if you are reaching out for help to anyone, or if you're doing any internet searches that might inflame your abuser, please make sure you clear your browser history and cover your tracks around making phone calls, emails, any kind of track that they could use against you, because if you are with an abuser, they will weaponize that, and that could be dangerous for you. Yeah, if in doubt, call 999 or emergency services. So the opposite of be strong is don't be strong. Yeah, reach out, get support, get help. The opposite of be perfect. We talked about being perfect, you know, that urge to show the world that you are achieving, that everything is great, everything's amazing in your world. What's the opposite of be perfect? Don't be perfect. This is not rocket science. So yeah, allowing yourself, like I'm the perfect example. I've sat here with wet hair. You know, a few years ago I would not have done a YouTube video with wet hair and just let it dry, and it looks very frizzy, but that's okay. I can see in my background I have higgledy-piggledy shoes, and a moomin look overseeing proceedings. That is not the image that I would have wanted to portray for myself in the past. I would have felt that would have looked unprofessional. So I probably, well, certainly my appearance, that was something that I found it, I would have found it very hard to sit here with what, you know, with wet hair. So I'm pushing through. No one's perfect, you know, news flash, no one's perfect. And actually, you know what? Here's, you know, something that I learned way later in life. Actually, people like you a lot more when you're not when you're not perfect. People are way, you're way more likely to connect, make new friendships if you are able to open up about not being perfect, because none of us are perfect. Hard to believe, I know, but yeah, if you know, if you are able to go, oh gosh, you know, put on half a stone on holiday, you know, rather than, you know, exercising until you drop in order to retain the perfect figure. Actually, there is a lot more richness to be had in relationships. When I say relationships, I mean non-abusive relationships, by being vulnerable. If you are in an abusive relationship, do not be vulnerable to the person that you're with. They will always weaponize it. Do not open up about any of your vulnerabilities. It's probably too late by now, but just heads up. We'll talk about that more in other videos. So hurry up. What's the opposite of hurrying up? Slowing down. Allowing yourself to put the to-do list down, taking time for yourself, sitting in a space of doing nothing, which will probably feel like torture to you, because we often use that as a way of distracting ourselves from actually sitting in our emotions and feeling our feelings. So that is big, deep work to do. I did a video about how I sat in silence for a day doing nothing. So maybe that's something you want to watch. I'm not suggesting you do it. If you've got a hurry up driver, that would probably feel like torture to you, but it might be interesting for you to see that it is possible, that you can do, you can do it, and it's actually really, really can be transformative. Please others. Again, I've got a video about this. What's the opposite of pleasing others? Please yourself. So starting to recognize that it's okay for you to have needs. You may actually, if I'm a recovering please others person, so it's ongoing work. And if you've spent a lifetime pleasing others, the very first step won't be, oh yes, I'm just going to please myself. The first step you will probably find it hard to even identify that you actually have needs, let alone what those needs are. So again, really deep work around, first of all, acknowledging that it's okay to have needs, and then trying to identify what those needs are. But yeah, so finally, try hard. What's the allowed to that? Just do it. Or I think that's the Nike slogan, isn't it? So it might be do it. Yeah, so again, simple to say, not so simple to do. You know, you've done all the groundwork for getting your driving test, but something's blocking you. What's blocking you? And so the invitation here is to just book it up, push through. If any of these are accompanied by trauma responses, like strong emotional responses, either on a freeze level of just not being able to move, not being able to do things, or on a heightened level of, you know, running away or just freaking out with reacting, very strongly reactive with feelings of anger, or just wanting to run away, then there's extra work to be done around understanding the trauma that lies at the root of that. But so this is just a basic outline of what it might be stopping you, the behaviors that you have in your life that feed into, or is fed by, your fear of other people judging you, which was originally, that was fear of being rejected and abandoned by your tribe on an evolutionary level. And then as a child, secondarily, fear of being rejected by your parents and therefore not surviving. Other layers would have been relationships at school, friendship groups, teachers, wider family, fear of their judgment. If you belong to an organisation, fear of their judgment, particularly the military. That's a whole different video. If you were raised in any kind of military background or organisation, there's a lot of judgment there. A lot of judgment in places like some of the boarding schools. So these are all extra layers, and if you've previously been in abusive relationships before your current one, there will be layers around that will have left you with some really toxic messages around, you're not good enough, it's not okay for you to leave this. There'll be a lot of shame connected with that. And the work then for you will be trying to get back to you, understand your core values and understand what's ultimately best for you and your children, perhaps. Which, you know, therapy is ideal. If you can't afford therapy, or if therapy is not accessible to you, then start your shadow work, start your self-development work. Loads of good videos out there. Hopefully some of mine might be helpful. And yeah, just bringing this into your awareness, journaling, and starting to look at the reasons, the root causes of why you're behaving like this, why you have these messages embedded in your brain. What are those judgments saying about you? And do you believe them? Do you believe them, or do you actually want to change them? So anyway, another long video. Thank you so much for watching. I have a lot more to say. I will be uploading more videos about leaving toxic and or abusive relationships. I really hope this is helpful. As I said before, please do reach out for support to those qualified to offer support. The Samaritans, there's loads of really good organisations out there. Do take care, do look after yourself, and I will speak to you again soon. Thanks for watching. Bye.